Hello and welcome back to Soul GPS, where we learn to trust our intuition again after having been through abuse in order to create the life we truly want. And today I wanted to talk to you about a very interesting topic that deals with trance induction and hypnosis and how narcissists and psychopaths use that in order to manipulate us and make us do the things that we normally wouldn't do. So you may wonder whether you've been hypnotized or trance-induced while you were in a relationship with a narcissist. And often that happens because we don't know enough about what trance induction and hypnosis really are and how they occur. But just the mere fact that you were likely spaced out and absorbed into a life that was a little bit different than the life that you were used to before is a great indicator that you were in trance. Another good indicator is your exhaustion, the fact that you felt literally your life was being sucked out of you. And that can happen early on or it can take some time. So another good indicator is looking back at what happened and you realizing that this was not typical to your own relational history. This was not what you normally do. You normally don't do the things that they made you do. Yet this is another good sign that you have been trance-induced. So the reason why is because people who get targeted for narcissistic abuse tend to be empathic, so scoring very high on empathy traits, meaning we can feel into other people. This makes us highly suggestible, and to, of course, another person's guidance. And also, once we get hooked into this cycle, what also tends to happen is it stays. So if it began this way, if it happened, if you were lured in, which you likely were, this kind of a trance state is going to stay and only deepen throughout the relationship with a narcissist. So here's some really interesting things that I have gathered. Part of a narcissistic trance is future faking. It's luring you in with all sorts of images about the future and what it is that the two of you are going to have together. This is how the narcissist begins to plan himself or herself on a timeline that leads into your future. So as you're looking into, as you're dreaming about your future, perhaps you've already had some ideas before meeting the narcissist of what your future would look like. Now they are in it. Perhaps the trajectory has moved and it's now going in a little bit of a different direction because they're in it. That is the exact point of why they do this. So they want to basically get inside your head. I remember my 9-year-long relationship with a psychopath I heard that a lot. He was saying things like, I'm in your head, I know what you're thinking. So I would, after a few years of that, I would be scared of my own thoughts. Because whenever I would question him, I would think, wow, he now knows what I'm thinking, I'm in trouble. Perhaps it sounds familiar to you. So what is trance? Trance is a natural mind state. It's basically tuning in and tuning out of a variety of states that are not just the full here and now state that we enter through practice of what's called mindfulness, where we are fully absorbed in the moment. Trance is when we dip out of the moment. So one common example of that is when you're driving on a highway as a passenger and you're looking at the lines passing by. That's how you kind of, this is kind of a gateway into a trance. And then what ends up happening is you probably start to fantasize and go into sort of altered states of consciousness. So what's also really interesting about trance states is they help us numb our pain, which is why a lot of people who have been put into suggestible states in narcissistic relationships, when they're abused, they don't feel it as much because they believe they're living in this sort of kind of like a fantasy, which cushions the hardness, the rigidity, and really the suffering and the pain that is going on in the background, which our bodies tend to pick up relatively early on. And you may feel kind of stomach aches, you may feel your anxiety going up, You may feel shoulder pain. These are all messages that are coming to you from the here and now, and that are trying to break through the trance that you're in to signal to you that something is wrong. It's essentially your intuition talking to you. So how is this induced, and what are the steps? So I have been reading several things about trance and hypnosis, and watching movies and videos about this. And what I have discerned from the literature and the video is that it follows these 4 steps. First step is luring the victim in. Second step is overwhelming them with all sorts of sensory sensations. Step number 3 is breakdown. And step number 4 is reward. So we're going to walk through these steps right now. So how is it induced? The first stage is the luring, and I'm sure you're already familiar with this if you have been watching other videos, which there's a ton of wonderful videos on YouTube about love bombing and what that is, and how the narcissist basically interviews you, gets to know what it is that you want, and begins to shower you with all sorts of words and phrases and gestures, all that tailor to your biggest vulnerability. So let's say you're afraid of being rejected, or you are feeling lonely and isolated. So they're going to tell you how wonderful you are, how intelligent you are, how beautiful you are, how seen you are. They're going to make you feel seen for the first time in your life. You've never been seen this much, because normal people, they will see you and they will engage with you, but they will also stay anchored within themselves. So there should be like a balanced way of exchange. With a narcissist, you're going to be flooded with so much attention and intensity that it's going to overwhelm your senses. Right? It's going to feel incredibly good. So once you're lured in, the emotional overload begins. And this can happen through just the fact that they're giving you a lot of attention, but also chemical manipulation is something that I wrote down here in my notes. And the reason why is because I've referred to this in my other videos. What they're very skilled at is emotional manipulation and inducing all sorts of states which release naturally in our body into a bloodstream a cocktail of chemicals. Oftentimes they're chemicals that are at odds with each other, such as cortisol and oxytocin. Oxytocin being the bonding chemical, and cortisol being the stress chemical. So again, your body is sensing that something's off, but it feels good, so you want more, and the more is the dopamine chemical, which then makes you want to come back for more and crave more. They are very good also at making you not get enough rest or enough sleep. Being around them is so electrifying and stimulating that it is difficult to focus on anything else. They become the center of your attention. This is exactly the same kind of thing that that military uses, same strategy, and cults use that as well. So they are going to make you work so hard, or chant so long, or dance all night long, or pray so intensely that you're going to get so overwhelmed with sensory stimuli that will put you in a state that is extremely easy for them to suggest things to you. So when you're kind of floating in this bubble, in this kind of a state of a bit of a no man's land, you lose sense of direction. It's like your compass just kind of shatters momentarily. And this is fine to do as long as it's kind of bookended, and you know, for instance, you're doing a dance class, or you are doing some form of a spiritual practice that you enjoy to do. You know what's going to begin and when it's going to end, and you have a sense of control. So you enter those different states of consciousness, and perhaps you get insights that way, or you enter a very deeply creative flow state, but then you come out of it and then you're back in reality. I know this happens to me when I write. I need to remember about many different characters, so what are they doing and where they are. So I'm not here, I'm not in this world. My body is here, but my mind is somewhere else. So these are some ideas. So what they're really good at, these narcissists and these psychopaths, is they're naturally skilled at getting all of your attention focused on them. So they are doing this with their eyes, they do it with their voice, they do it with their touch, and they do it with their talking. You know, I'm sure you have noticed that your narcs they just can't shut up, right? They talk and talk and talk and then tell you all of these stories from their lives, which will then later reverberate in your head for months. You know, you may have to work pretty hard to get all of them out, and eventually it will fizzle out, especially as you will start connecting the dots and figuring out how much bullshit they have fed you. And once the truth barometer really gets strong in you, and it will, these things would just start bubbling out and fizzling out, and they will actually even be maybe even kind of ridiculously funny. At some point you'll be thinking, how can somebody even say such thing? Right? And this would be funny if it wasn't for the tragic emotions and the whole damage that this creates. So their stories are going to flood your brain. And another sign of the fact that you are in trance is you're blocking off all other things that are going on. So you might not notice somebody walking into a room or walking outside. You may not notice cars driving by. You may not notice how many songs have already played. And time tends to speed up. You might be looking at your calendar or looking at the time and be going like, oh my God, you realize how much time you're losing to this relationship, to this state, to being with this person. And so time loss is very indicative of trance states. So who falls into this trap? Well, here's something really, really, really interesting. And I read this, I was like, wow. Because I would feel kind of stupid, to be honest, after I have been through this 4-month-long emotional roller coaster. Oh, that was the last one. The most recent one was 4 months. Previously, I was in a 9-year-long relationship. So you can only imagine what that was like. Anyway, so the people who are targeted and who really respond the best to trance are people who are successful, people who are accomplished, people who are very intelligent. And you know why? The reason why is because we're naturally very good at focusing. So for instance, like for me, it's my writing. I need to focus for sometimes 3-4 hours nonstop doing work, and it's like it's hard work. You may have a corporate job, or you may, work with patients, or you may be a very successful psychiatrist even, it's like all sorts of people fall into this trap of this because we are naturally very curious, and we have the ability to suspend our disbelief and get into, that's our open-minded quality, get into something that is different and maybe a little bit weird or off. But because we're bombarded with oxytocin while we're at it, it's making us feel good, and it's luring us deeper. So then when we disconnect, and of course there's the dopamine, right? When we disconnect, what tends to happen is we miss it. We want it more. It becomes like a fix, like a drug. So the narc becomes like a drug. Very common. So problem solvers, empaths are the people who tend to be targeted and fall into this. We naturally want to solve the narcissist problem. And when they do tell us all these stories about, how they have been mistreated in their life and how life's been just so hard on them, we listen with our empathic ears and with our problem solver attitudes, and we're thinking up, all sorts of solutions of how we can help. And we know we're super resourceful, and now they know that too. And they want those resources, but they want it for all sorts of other purposes and reasons that, of course, they're not sharing. So many ways to overwhelm the senses. Intensity is the primary one. Sexual intensity in particular, especially when the breaths become synchronized. If there's music playing in the background, that adds to the intensity. There's more sensory overwhelm, flickering lights like candles, so like there's all sorts of stuff happening around us. So and so the narcissist can then implant all sorts of ideas into our minds. This is also what happens, which is why I would not recommend, if you're looking for a partner, although there are exceptions to the rule, to look for one in a place like a club, right? Because that is like primary area where you have sensory overload from music, from all sorts of people, plus you may be drinking or taking drugs. So this puts you in a highly suggestible state, and then you may wake up the next morning and say, well, what the fuck just happened, right? So this is why. So they use this hyperfocus. They're very good at making you focus on them. They may say things like, look into my eyes, right? They might use symbolism, tell you things like, oh, I have you locked in my heart, or things like, I found my other half. So you have all this imagery that later might haunt you and work your subconscious. So are they naturally really good at this? Like, do they really have this talent to do that? Have they studied it? You know, the answer is not necessarily. They're just very good at observing what works and then adjusting. I remember with my last episode, when I would say something like, yeah, I don't think so, or I don't like this, he would just like, at first he would be like put off, like, what? Like, how dare you? Almost like attitude, like, how dare you not like this or respond to this? And then I remember he would just sit there and kind of think and just be gone for a moment, and then come out with another idea and try me from another angle. And it was like right in front of me, but I didn't see it. I would always think like, well, what is he doing? What's he thinking about right now? But I wouldn't question it, right? But there are definitely techniques that they can use. Now, the person I was with for 9 years, he was actually a skilled NLP practitioner. He would brag about this, and he was a trained hypnotherapist, he would call himself. And so he would say that right up front. He wouldn't hide it. But then one thing he would say, something I just remembered recently as I was doing, looking into this a little bit deeper, is he would say to me things like, the people who think can't be hypnotized are the easiest to hypnotize, right? Think about that. People who think they can't be hypnotized are the easiest to hypnotize. Because I immediately, when I heard that, I was like, I put up my shield. I said, nope, he's not going to hypnotize me. And then he would say that. And before I knew it, I was already in trance. So you see how subtle this is. What my recent one did was he would use fear, and he would say things like, I see you're afraid of me. You don't have to be afraid of me. So I would immediately want to counter that and say, no, of course I'm not afraid of you, which would make me open up and surrender to his suggestibility. What else do? They use imagery in the way they talk. So metaphors, they paint pretty pictures, because pictures tend to stay in our minds longer. They also, in order for them to deepen the bond, they encourage remembering. So they're going to repeat the same stories over and over and over again. And they do this very clever thing, which coupled with future faking, makes them sort of infestate, if such word exists, makes them hijack our entire timeline. So they're going to talk about our childhood. They might begin by sharing stories from their childhood with you, usually of abuse and neglect and all sorts of things like that. And so then you're going to do the same. And as they tell you all the stories from their childhood and they listen to yours, what happens in your mind is they're getting inserted into your past. So as you're now thinking about your past, you see them in it. It's almost as if you had your childhood lived in parallel. So they hijack your past, and by future faking and painting pictures into the future and what you guys are going to create together, they're infestating your future. And so, but the one place where they can't really get you, and that's the Achilles heel of the narcissist, psychopath, is the present moment and being mindful to what is. Because if you really saw what they were up to, and if you really connected with the pain that was arising in your body that you were constantly ignoring, you would see them for who they are. But they're so good at always swaying you either left or right, either into the past or into the future. The other thing that they use is reframing, right? So changing the context to what is happening. this gets really insidious when it comes to cheating, right? They might cheat on you, and then you find out, and they'll say, well, honey, listen, this wasn't really that. I just look at it this way. We're just an open-minded couple, and this really didn't mean anything. This was just sex. I love you. You're the only one for me. This doesn't matter. Or things promoting polygamy, promoting having multiple partners. When you're like, if it's consensual, no problem. But if it isn't consensual, they might make you feel like, well, this is more spiritually advanced to do it this way, and if you don't do it, therefore you're not spiritually advanced. So it's, and they're using, now we're getting into the point of reward. They're using reward and telling you, oh, you're so open-minded, you're so wonderful for allowing this, right? And so now you feel better about what happened. So reframing is changing the context of what's happening so that you look at things differently in a more benign way. And enough of that kind of training, you're going to make excuses for them without them even having to say anything, right? So it's like it gets you in, puts you in that mindset. So then you continue their work. So this is the point at which you're basically broken. This is the place at which, so you've had your old set of beliefs. This is the old you before meeting them. Then you get lured in. They will overwhelm you, trance induce you until the point where the old you is going to shatter and break. And you're going to adopt their set of beliefs, their way of thinking, their attitudes. And at this point, you basically won't even remember who you were. I remember this was, let's see, in 90s, 5 years into my 9-year-long relationships, just about when I was halfway there. I remember I was driving home from work, and I was trying to think of myself and how I was before. I was starting to really awaken, and it took a while. It took another 4 years before I realized what was going on. I did not have any of this material available, and I was very young. So I started when I was 19 years old, so I was really highly suggestible. I had just moved into the United States. I did not know, what I was doing. All I knew is I needed to finish school, but everything else was up in the air. So I was in a very highly suggestible state, because people who know what they want and who they are not easily lured. You're on your way, you're on your path, and you're going to drive it to the end. You have, mastered practices that you do every day in order to accomplish your goals and fulfill your dreams. Narc stands no chance. I didn't know what I was doing. So when this person came in, he was kind of a savior, right? He gave me work. He then started to make advances towards me, and he was incredibly accomplished, successful looking. Now this was all facade, turned out. Intelligent, intriguing person. Was hard to say no. And so anyway, so it took me a while to awaken. So when I was about halfway through the cycle, I started to look for myself. I'm like, where is this Ava that I used to know, And I was like, holy shit. That there was like a tiny little flicker left. I was acting like him. I sounded like him. I thought like him. I mean, I went in all the way. I was gone. And so I was like, okay, I got to do something about this. Is wrong. And of course, immediately when I parked my car, walked inside the house, he knew something was different. And he's like, what's going on? So the guilt came in, and then I realized I need to hide. I need to stop telling him everything, because I used to tell him everything, because again, he made me feel like he could read my mind, and he couldn't read my mind. This was all trance induction. These were all suggestible thoughts that I got to believe and adopt. So I said, no, nothing, everything is fine, or something along those lines. I don't remember exactly. And I went into my room with my eyes wide open and a journal in my hand. I'm like, oh God, I got to write this down. This is amazing. And he was, he didn't react. He didn't say another word. So I knew that he couldn't read my mind. That was the beginning of undoing this ball of wax and getting my sanity back, which took a long, long time. So they basically break you. That's the whole idea, is to break the old, break who you used to be, inject their sense of self into you so you act and behave the way they want you to act and behave, which is basically to be their servant, their slave, to be at their disposal. and then they're going to reward you with doses of affection and quote-unquote love to keep you tied in. All the while they have their own life. You know, usually it's like a double life, triple life, or more. You know, they might be pretending like they're in a committed relationship with you, but they're acting single out there and getting more what's called supply for what they, because they know, probably they sense that you're gonna leave eventually, it's gonna have to end, so they need other people lined up in queue. So the result of this form of mindfuck, trance induction, criminal way of keeping another person's captive is total absorption into their life, and you forgetting about who you are and what's important to you. You may experience this as something called life fading. So your life just dissolves. You're no longer even that much cognizant of the things that used to be important to you. Your workouts are no longer important. Maybe you changed your eating habits. You're no longer reading the way you used to. You're no longer hanging out with your friends. Your whole life is fading, and it's all about them. And it becomes really, really difficult to leave them. And it's not because you don't want to or didn't want to. I wanted to leave both of mine, at least 20%, if not 30%, when I take it as a scope, right, before it ran its course. But I couldn't. And one of the reasons was because I did remember the best times we've had, and I felt so invested. And I thought, if they could be so wonderful in the beginning, what stops them from being so wonderful now? And of course, what stops them being so wonderful now and being what they used to be is because it's not who they are. It's not who they are. The truth of who they are is what you see at the end. The beginning was all a game, all a facade that was perfected over years, decades, to see what really works. And they tend to be pretty smart people. They read a lot. They watch a lot of videos. I'm sure they're watching these videos too. Now they're going to, they might get better at their game because of the awareness that is building around narcissistic abuse. But we're going to outdo them every time. And I would say the most important thing you can do in order not to fall into the trap is make yourself, number one, make yourself the most important person in your life. Focus all your attention on your dreams. Drive your life forward towards what it is that you desire, because they are so good at sucking our energy, and they're terrible energy vampires that when we feel like what we want and what we aspire to, and we think about the dreams we have, in the future, the whole picture, that's ours, not theirs, ours, our dream. It may seem almost impossible to accomplish. It may seem so difficult and so daunting. Like, how are we ever going to do this? Like, I know I want to write a story that hits the New York Times bestseller list. It's a huge, it's such a hit or miss. It's so difficult. And I've been at it for 6 years now, and I'm just beginning to understand what it is to be a storyteller. It's really a fine craft. So to think of it like, how am I ever going to be able to do it, seems almost impossible, because about 60, 70, 80% of our energy reserves are being hijacked and sucked out of us. So we're operating at 10, 20, 30, 40% of our maximum capacity. That's very low. So no wonder it seems difficult to live our dreams. But when you're able to cut the narcissist out of your life, when you'll be able to then heal, there will be a time. Give yourself 6 months to a year, maybe even 2 years, to be gentle with yourself. That doesn't mean that during this time you won't be able to start working on your goals. But just know it's going to be an easy ramp up. Don't stress yourself too much over this, because it's going to take time. Once you get to a certain stage of healing, your energy is going to skyrocket. You're going to wake up one day. It might be gradual, or it might be sudden. You're going to wake up one day and you're going to be like feeling like a different person. Suddenly all these dreams are going to seem so much more available to you. Doors will start opening. You'll meet the right people on your path. The universe will take care of you, even after this terrible betrayal has happened, because the universe has always been there for you. We weren't listening. We weren't listening. But we can take this experience as an immense learning experience that is going to launch us forward into the life of our dreams. And that starts with listening to our intuition. I hope this helped you. If you found this helpful, please let me know, comment, subscribe, give me likes, share your thoughts, share your ideas. And if you know someone who's going through this right now and they are confused, they don't know what's happening to them, share this video. Thank you so much for being here as part of my community. There will be more. I can't wait to share with you so much information I have gathered on this topic. And see you on the other side of the world, most likely next time. Take care, ciao, and have a beautiful day.